The air in Delphi was thick with incense and anticipation as seekers from across the ancient world climbed the sacred slopes, their futures hanging on the words of a single woman. This wasn't just any priestess, she was the Oracle, a vessel for the god Apollo himself, whose cryptic pronouncements could launch wars, topple kings, or save entire cities. But what really happened in that shadowy chamber beneath the temple? How did a young woman chosen by Lot channel the divine with such unnerving precision? For centuries, historians have puzzled over the oracle's power. Was it divine inspiration, clever deception, or something far more surprising hidden in the very rocks of Delphi? Today, we're pulling back the veil on history's most famous prophetess, examining the sacred rituals, the political manipulations, and the startling geological secret that might explain everything. The truth is stranger than the myths. Long before Delphi became the most revered oracle in the ancient world, its sacred status was etched into myth itself. Legend tells us Zeus, king of the gods, once sought to find the center of the earth. He released two golden eagles, one from the far east, the other from the distant west, and watched as they crossed paths high above the slopes of Mount Parnassus. This was no ordinary meeting point. The spot where they collided marked the very navel of the world, a place known as the Omphalos, where divine and mortal realms converged. But Delphi's transformation into a seat of prophecy came with bloodshed. Apollo, the radiant god of truth and foresight, had to wrest control of this sacred ground from the serpent Python, a monstrous guardian of the earth's primal power. His victory wasn't just a mythic battle, it was a symbolic shift from chaos to order, from darkness to enlightenment. With Python slain, Apollo established his temple, and with it the oracle who would speak in his name. From these legendary roots, Delphi grew beyond a simple shrine. Pilgrims, kings, and generals alike traveled for days, sometimes months, to seek wisdom from the Pythia, Apollo's chosen mouthpiece. What began as a local cult site soon became the spiritual and political nerve center of Greece. The oracle's words shaped wars, guided colonies, and even decided the fates of entire empires. Her authority was absolute because in the eyes of the ancient world, she didn't just predict the future, she revealed the will of the gods themselves. Yet beneath these myths lies something even more fascinating. The ancients didn't just choose Delphi at random. There was something about this place, something in the very earth beneath the temple, that made it unlike any other site in Greece. The answers may lie not in the heavens, but deep within the ground. The rugged slopes of Mount Parnassus didn't just provide a dramatic backdrop for Delphi, they held the key to its supernatural reputation. This wasn't a place chosen for convenience. The ancient Greeks believed the site pulsed with a primal energy, centered around a fissure in the earth that exhaled strange, intoxicating vapors. Early accounts describe the Pythia descending into a sunken chamber within the temple, where she would perch above this crack in the rock, breathing air thick with what priests called the pneuma of the slain serpent Python. But modern research reveals something astonishing. Delphi sits atop intersecting fault lines where subterranean gases like ethylene, a sweet-smelling compound known to induce euphoria and altered states, would have seeped into the chamber. The temple's design was no accident either. Built directly over the fissure, its inner sanctum was engineered to concentrate these vapors. The room was sunken, windowless, and lined with porous limestone, which absorbed moisture and amplified the gas's effects. When the Pythia took her seat on the tripod, a three-legged cauldron positioned directly above the fissure, she wasn't just reciting riddles. She was inhaling the very breath of the earth, entering a state where the line between mortal and divine blurred. Witnesses described her convulsions, her wild eyes, the way her voice seemed to shift into something not entirely human. Was this possession, chemical intoxication? or a combination of both, carefully harnessed by the priests. Yet the real genius of Delphi lay in how its natural wonders were woven into myth. The same fumes said to rise from Python's corpse were also attributed to Apollo's divine presence, a perfect fusion of geology and storytelling. Pilgrims arriving at the sanctuary would first drink from the Castalian spring, its icy waters believed to purify mind and body. Then they'd climb the sacred way, passing monuments paid for by kings and city-states, tributes to the oracle's undeniable influence. By the time they reached the temple, every detail, from the smell of burning laurel leaves to the trembling voice of the Pythia, reinforced the idea that this was a place where the gods spoke directly to mortals. Here, the natural and supernatural didn't just coexist, they collaborated. The trembling earth, the intoxicating air, the echoing words of the Pythia, all of it conspired to create an experience so potent that even skeptics left shaken. But the true heart of the mystery wasn't the gases or the geography. It was the woman at the center of it all, the Pythia, a figure both ordinary and extraordinary, whose visions would shape history itself. Beneath the grandeur of the temple rituals, the Pythia herself remained a mystery, an ordinary woman entrusted with extraordinary power. Unlike the aristocratic priestesses of other cults, she wasn't born into nobility. Delphi's prophets were often selected from local farmers' daughters, chosen for their unblemished character and simple lives. Imagine the weight of that moment. One day, a young woman grinding grain or tending goats, the next, the living voice of a god. Her preparation was as precise as it was surreal. Before each prophecy, she'd descend to the Castalian spring, its icy waters scouring away any earthly impurity. Then came the laurel leaves, Apollo's sacred plant, chewed slowly to open her mind to the divine. Some ancient sources even describe her drinking water from a secret spring within the temple, laced with traces of the same vapors that seeped from the chasm. Every step was designed to dissolve the barrier between mortal and immortal. Then the climax, seated on her three-legged cauldron, skirted by rising gases, the Pythia would shudder as Apollo's presence overtook her. Witnesses wrote of her contorted limbs, foaming mouth, and a voice that dropped octaves, a sound so unsettling that priests stood ready to steady her if she lurched toward the fissure. But the most haunting detail, her prophecies weren't delivered in clear verse. They spilled forth in raw, disjointed phrases like fragments of a dream. It fell to the temple's male priests to sculpt her chaotic utterances into the riddles that would decide fates. This delicate dance between the divine and the human wasn't just spiritual theater. The Pythia's trance had to feel terrifyingly real because lives depended on it. Cities on the brink of war, colonists setting sail for unknown lands, even kings accused of crimes, all hung on her fragmented words. Yet history hints at the toll this took. Some oracles reportedly died young, their bodies depleted by the rituals. Others, like the Pythia who faced Alexander the Great, grew so defiant in their trances that they bypassed the priests entirely, speaking with unnerving clarity. What's striking isn't just how the Pythia channeled the gods, it's how the system protected her. By design, her raw utterances were filtered through priests, giving Delphi plausible deniability when prophecies went awry. If a prediction failed, was it Apollo's will or a mortal's misinterpretation? The brilliance of this arrangement kept the oracle's authority intact for centuries. But behind the smoke and ceremony, one question lingers. In those frenzied moments atop the tripod, did the Pythia believe she was truly speaking for Apollo? Or did she, like the pilgrims, become another piece of Delphi's grand illusion? The answer may lie not in her rituals, but in the cryptic language she left behind, a puzzle of twisted syntax and deliberate ambiguity that turned simple questions into legendary prophecies. The words of the Pythia were never straightforward. They slithered between meanings, leaving kings and generals scrambling to decipher them. When the wealthy king Croesus stood before her, seeking divine approval to invade Persia, her response was classic Delphi. If you cross the river, a great empire will fall. Blinded by confidence, he assumed victory was guaranteed. Only after his army crumbled did he realize the empire doomed to collapse was his own. This wasn't mere coincidence, it was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. The priests of Delphi perfected a language of layered meanings where every prophecy balanced hope and warning. By speaking in riddles, the oracle couldn't be pinned down. Success, divine wisdom; failure, human misinterpretation. It was an airtight system, one that turned Delphi into the ultimate political chessboard. City-states would send envoys with lavish gifts, knowing the phrasing of a prophecy could tilt alliances or demoralize enemies. Take the Athenians during the Persian Wars. Facing annihilation, they begged for guidance and received a cryptic promise: the wooden walls alone shall not fall. Some argued it meant barricading the city, but the statesman Themistocle saw deeper. It was a call to their navy, their wooden ships. That single interpretation changed the course of history at the Battle of Salamis. Yet the brilliance of Delphic ambiguity lay in its adaptability. A prophecy given to the Spartans: either your glorious city must be sacked or a king of Sparta must die, seemed dire until King Leonidas chose sacrifice over surrender at Thermopylae, spinning doom into legend. Even in failure, the oracle's reputation grew. After all, had the message been clear, would Leonidas have become immortal? But this wordplay wasn't just about preserving divine infallibility. It mirrored the chaos of life itself. In a world where droughts, wars, and plagues struck without reason, the Pythia's answers offered something rare: not certainty, but a framework to make sense of the unpredictable. Pilgrims didn't leave with answers, they left with stories they could reshape as needed. And that, perhaps, was the real prophecy all along. The true test of this system came when the oracle's words collided with history's most audacious conqueror, a man who refused to play by Delphi's rules. The influence of Delphi extended far beyond its misty mountain slopes. It was the ultimate power broker of the ancient world. Kings and generals didn't just visit the oracle for spiritual comfort. They came for political validation, knowing her ambiguous prophecies could rally armies or dissolve alliances with a single phrase. Consider Athens in the 5th century BCE. As the Persian Empire loomed, the city's leaders didn't just prepare their navy, they sent envoys to Delphi, desperate for divine sanction. The Pythia's response, cryptic as ever, became the backbone of Athenian strategy. Without that wooden walls prophecy, Greece's fate might have been sealed before the first ship ever sailed. But Delphi's political reach stretched even further. Sparta, Athens' eternal rival, relied just as heavily on the oracle's words. Before committing to war, their generals would delay entire campaigns until the Pythia's pronouncements aligned with their ambitions. And it wasn't just Greek city-states playing this game. Foreign rulers learned quickly that a blessing from Delphi carried weight. When Alexander the Great marched toward the temple in 336 BC, he didn't ask for guidance, he demanded endorsement. The Pythia, caught between defiance and tradition, allegedly told the conqueror, "You are invincible, my son." Whether she spoke under duress or inspiration, the prophecy followed Alexander all the way to the edges of the known world. What made Delphi indispensable wasn't just its divine reputation, it was its neutrality. Positioned between warring factions, the sanctuary became a diplomatic hub where enemies could seek counsel without losing face. Colonies bound for distant shores made detours to Delphi, trusting the oracle to name their settlements and bless their ventures. A prophecy could turn a risky expedition into a divine mandate, ensuring settlers followed through even when the journey turned deadly. Yet this power came with peril. Leaders who ignored the Pythia's warnings became cautionary tales, like the Spartan king Cleomenes, whose career ended in madness and disgrace after defying her. Others, like the Athenian commander Nicias, hesitated fatally in battle, paralyzed by overly literal interpretations of her riddles. The oracle's genius lay in giving just enough direction to inspire action, but not so much that failure could be pinned on the gods. Behind the grand pronouncements, Delphi's priests were master strategists, weaving geopolitics into prophecy. Their words didn't just predict the future, they shaped it, one carefully crafted riddle at a time. But while kings and generals clung to every syllable, a far more intriguing question simmered beneath the surface. What was really happening to the Pythia in that sunlit chamber? The answer lies not in scrolls or myths, but in the very earth beneath her feet. The ancient descriptions of the Pythia's trances, her trembling limbs, glazed eyes, and guttural utterances sound like something ripped from supernatural lore. Yet modern science offers a startlingly simple explanation. Beneath Apollo's temple, geologists discovered intersecting fault lines in the limestone bedrock, creating pathways for gases to rise from deep within the earth. Among these vapors was ethylene, a sweet-scented hydrocarbon with properties that align eerily with historical accounts. In low doses, ethylene induces a dreamlike euphoria, exactly the state witnesses described when the Pythia communed with the gods. What's remarkable isn't just the presence of this gas, but its precise effects. Ethylene doesn't just cause lightheadedness, it can trigger dissociative states where time seems to warp and sensation blurs. Picture the Pythia perched above that fissure, breathing air laced with this invisible catalyst. Her convulsions, her fragmented speech, they weren't theater. They were the involuntary reactions of a mind untethered, caught between this world and whatever visions the gas conjured. Even the temple's architecture played a role. The sunken chamber trapped the vapors, while the porous limestone walls absorbed moisture, intensifying their potency. But here's where myth and science twist together. The ancients didn't know about hydrocarbons. They called these vapors the breath of Python or Apollo's divine presence. The gas's sweet smell, proof of the god's favor. The Pythia's erratic behavior, a sign of his possession. Every natural phenomenon was woven seamlessly into the sacred narrative, reinforcing Delphi's power. Yet for all their ignorance of chemistry, the priests understood something profound about human psychology. They didn't just rely on the gas, they curated an entire sensory experience. The chill of the purification springs, the smoke of burning laurel, the echoing chants, to heighten the oracle's trance and the pilgrim's awe. This revelation doesn't diminish Delphi's mystique, it deepens it. The real miracle wasn't supernatural fumes, it was how the Greeks weaponized coincidence. The right gas in the right place at the right time, harnessed by a culture brilliant enough to spin it into legend. But while ethylene explains the Pythia's trances, it doesn't account for the prophecy's uncanny accuracy. That secret lies elsewhere, in the shrewdness of Delphi's priests, who mastered the art of turning vague phrases into political gold. Of course, not every tale about Delphi holds up to scrutiny. Some myths persist, like the idea that the oracle always spoke in perfect hexameter verse. She didn't. Priests often polished her raving, or that her prophecies were infallible. Tell that to Croesus. Even the famous "Know Thyself" inscription at the temple wasn't about introspection. It was a warning against overconfidence when questioning the gods. The truth is, Delphi thrived not because it was magic, but because it was brilliantly, ruthlessly human. The image of the Pythia writhing in ecstatic frenzy, foaming at the mouth as she shrieked unintelligible prophecies, is etched into popular imagination, but history paints a far more nuanced picture. Contemporary accounts from philosophers like Plutarch, who served at Delphi, reveal a striking contrast. Many oracles delivered their messages with eerie calm, sometimes even in measured poetic verse. Imagine a woman seated straight-backed on the tripod, eyes distant but focused, her words flowing with rhythmic precision as priests transcribed them. This wasn't the chaos of possession, it was the chilling clarity of a conduit. Yet this very discipline fueled another misconception, that Delphi's priests routinely twisted prophecies like political puppeteers. While there were certainly instances of manipulation, a well-timed ambiguous phrase could nudge a city-state toward alliance or war. The vast majority of consultations followed a sacred protocol. Petitioners brought offerings, underwent purification rites, and framed their questions carefully, not as yes or no demands, but as open-ended pleas for divine wisdom. The priest's role wasn't to invent answers, but to interpret the Pythia's symbolic language, much like translating a dream's surreal logic into actionable advice. Take the famous case of King Lysander of Sparta. When he attempted to bribe the oracle for a favorable prophecy, the priests didn't just refuse, they publicly exposed his sacrilege, reinforcing Delphi's reputation for integrity. Even the temple's financial records, etched in stone for all to see, listed every gift from grateful supplicants, dispelling myths of backroom deals. The real power of Delphi lay in its balance, enough ambiguity to allow for human agency, enough specificity to feel divinely ordained. What often gets lost in dramatized retellings is the Pythia's humanity. She wasn't a puppet or a raving mystic, but a trained interpreter of the sacred. Between consultations, she lived quietly in the temple complex, forbidden from personal relationships or wealth. The role demanded not just spiritual sensitivity, but immense emotional stamina to channel the hopes and fears of empires while remaining impartial. That tension between mortal frailty and divine authority is what made her prophecies resonate for centuries. But no institution, no matter how revered, lasts forever. Even as we untangle the truths of Delphi's golden age, shadows were gathering, political shifts, religious doubts, and a changing world that would soon have little patience for riddles from the mountains. The next chapter wouldn't be written by priests or oracles, but by conquerors and skeptics. The glory of Delphi wasn't extinguished in a single moment, it crumbled under the weight of a changing world. As Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, the whispers of pagan gods grew fainter. No longer did kings kneel before the Pythia's tripod, instead they bowed to the cross. In 390 AD, Emperor Theodosius struck the final blow, ordering the sanctuary sealed as part of his campaign to erase pagan worship. The sacred flames that had burned for centuries were snuffed out, the temple doors locked, and the voice of Apollo fell silent. But nature had its own role in Delphi's erasure. Earthquakes, those same tremors that once channeled prophetic gases, now shattered columns and sent landslides crashing through the sanctuary. Over time, soil and debris swallowed whole sections of the site, as if the earth itself was reclaiming the omphalos. Without priests to maintain the temples, looters stripped the complex bare. Gold votives melted down, statues hauled away. Even the legendary bronze tripod said to have supported the Pythia vanished into history's shadows. By the Middle Ages, Delphi was little more than a memory, its location lost beneath layers of dirt and myth, yet stories of the oracle refused to die. Medieval travelers spoke of a cursed valley where demons whispered from the rocks, while Renaissance scholars pored over ancient texts, dreaming of rediscovering the navel of the world. For centuries, Delphi existed as a phantom, a place half real, half legend, until a team of French archaeologists, armed with little more than Herodotus descriptions and local rumors, began digging in 1863. What they unearthed would rewrite history. Beneath a quiet Greek village called Castri, their shovels struck marble. First came the polygonal wall, its intricate masonry still perfectly fitted after millennia. Then the Athenian treasury emerged, its stones carved with hymns to Apollo. But the real revelation came when they reached the temple's Aditon, the sunken chamber where the Pythia prophesied. Though the fissure had long since sealed, traces of ethylene were detected in the bedrock, finally explaining her trances. With each discovery, Delphi's mythic past solidified into something tangible. A theater where Sophocles' plays premiered, a stadium that hosted ancient Greece's second most sacred games, and thousands of inscriptions confirming the oracle's influence on wars, laws, and even personal destinies. Today, walking Delphi's sacred way feels like stepping into a palimpsest of history. Christian chapels built atop pagan ruins, Ottoman coins mingled with Roman offerings, all layered like the prophecies themselves, ambiguous, overlapping, waiting to be deciphered. The stones may no longer speak, but their silence tells its own story, one of hubris, resilience, and the enduring human hunger to hear the divine whisper back. Now, as the midday sun casts shadows across the ruins, it's worth pausing to ask, did Delphi truly fade, or did it simply transform? The pilgrims still come, not with sacrificial goats, but guidebooks and cameras. The questions haven't disappeared either. We've just traded riddles from the gods for answers in the dirt. And perhaps that's the final prophecy, that no oracle, no matter how powerful, outlasts humanity's need to seek meaning in the unknown. The story of Delphi's rediscovery reads like an archaeological detective novel, one where crumbling manuscripts and local folklore led to one of history's greatest treasure hunts. By the early 19th century, the sanctuary had vanished so completely that scholars debated whether it had ever existed outside myth. Then in 1860, a young French diplomat named Charles Mauritian Champion followed a hunch. Guided by ancient texts describing Delphi's location, where two eagles met, he convinced a team to dig near the village of Castri. What they uncovered would stun the world. Layer by layer, the earth gave up its secrets. First came the unmistakable curve of the sacred way, its paving stones still grooved by countless pilgrim sandals. Next emerged the skeletal remains of the Temple of Apollo, its fallen columns resembling broken teeth against the mountain skyline. But the real showstopper waited near the theater, a life-sized bronze statue, its eyes inlaid with glass so hauntingly realistic that workers reportedly recoiled when they unearthed it. This was the charioteer, his serene gaze and delicately detailed curls frozen in time since the day he was buried, likely to hide him from looters. Nearby, another revelation, the omphalos, the sacred navel stone marking Delphi as the center of the world, still bearing the carved patterns priests once touched to channel divine energy. The finds didn't stop there. As excavators sifted through debris, they uncovered row upon row of treasuries, miniature temples where city-states like Athens and Sparta stored offerings to flaunt their wealth and piety. Each facade told a story. Athenian marble celebrated naval victories, Theban shields boasted of battlefield triumphs. Even the theater, carved into the mountainside with acoustics so precise a whisper could reach the top row, revealed its purpose, not just for plays but for the recitation of the Pythia's prophecies to crowds of thousands. Behind every artifact was a team of unsung heroes. Archaeologists like Theophile Hummel, who braved landslides and funding crises to map the site, or local villagers who recognized strange carvings in their garden walls as fragments of history. Their work pulled Delphi back from legend into tangible reality, stone by stone. Yet for all their triumphs, one mystery persists. Despite decades of digging, no trace of the Pythia's fabled tripod or the fissure's exact location has ever been found. Perhaps some secrets were meant to stay buried. What emerged from the dirt wasn't just a collection of ruins, it was a mirror. Delphi's grandeur reflected the anxieties and ambitions of an entire civilization, preserved not in gold or marble, but in the quiet patience of dirt and time. And as the last dust settled on those 19th century excavations, something unexpected happened. The oracle's voice, silent for 1500 years, began to speak again, not through prophecy, but through poetry, politics, and even pop culture. The whispers of Delphi never truly faded, they simply found new voices. Long after the temple's stones crumbled, the oracle's legacy seeped into our stories, our language, even the way we think about the future. Fantasy novels from Percy Jackson to Game of Thrones borrow her tropes: the cryptic seer, the perilous quest for truth, the prophecy that backfires when misread. Psychologists coin the term Delphic ambiguity to describe predictions so layered they're impossible to disprove, whether from a mystic or a weather forecast. Even modern tech gurus play the Pythia, wrapping vague predictions in the aura of inevitability. But Delphi wasn't the only ancient voice claiming a hotline to the divine. Across the Mediterranean, rival oracles rose and fell, each with their own flavor of mystery. At Dodona in northwestern Greece, priests interpreted the rustling of sacred oak leaves, while in Egypt, the Siwa Oasis oracle famously confirmed Alexander the Great as a son of Zeus. The competition was fierce, yet Delphi held its crown for centuries. Why? Because unlike others, it didn't just offer answers, it forged a language of power that balanced hope with existential dread, a formula so potent we're still recycling it today. The real testament to Delphi's genius isn't in the accuracy of its prophecies, but in their durability. From Shakespeare's witches murmuring, "Something wicked this way comes," to sci-fi AI overlords spouting ominous riddles, the Pythia's shadow looms large. She taught us that prophecy isn't about seeing the future, it's about holding up a mirror to the present, reflecting back the fears and ambitions we're too afraid to name outright. And in that sense, the oracle never stopped speaking. She just traded her tripod for a screenplay, her laurel leaves for a Twitter thread, proving that some truths are too slippery for straightforward telling. While the Oracle of Delphi might be the most famous, it was far from the only sacred voice in the ancient world. Just a few hundred miles northwest at Dodona, seekers listened not to a priestess but to the whispering of oak leaves, a sound believed to carry Zeus's will. Over in Italy, the Sibyl of Cumae scrawled her visions on fragile oak leaves, leaving petitioners scrambling to read them before the wind carried their futures away. These oracles all claimed divine connection, but none operated quite like Delphi. What made Delphi stand out wasn't just the Pythia's trances, it was the razor-sharp balance between spectacle and ambiguity. At Dodona, answers were often literal. The rustle of leaves meant yes or no, leaving little room for interpretation. The Sibyl's leaf-bound prophecies, while poetic, could literally blow away before being understood. But Delphi, its genius lay in structured chaos. The Pythia's fragmented ramblings forced petitioners to engage, to wrestle with meaning. A consultation at Delphi wasn't a transaction. It was a performance where every gasp of the priestess and every pause by the interpreter amplified the drama. The differences extended to their audiences too. Dodona catered to everyday questions: should I marry? Is my voyage safe? While Delphi's clients included emperors and generals staking entire wars on a single phrase. Even the Sibyl, though revered, lacked Delphi's political clout. Her prophecies, collected in Rome's sacred Sibylline books, were consulted only in emergencies, like cryptic insurance policies against disasters. Yet Delphi's real edge was its ruthlessly efficient branding. Unlike other oracles tied to specific gods or local cults, Delphi positioned itself as the universal spiritual switchboard. Apollo's domain covered everything from medicine to music, making his oracle a one-stop shop for crises, personal and geopolitical. By the time a pilgrim arrived, having survived the treacherous mountain paths, they were primed to believe. That journey was no accident. Exhaustion and anticipation made minds more receptive to the Pythia's enigmatic words. But before anyone could hear those words, they had to endure rituals designed to strip away certainty. The process wasn't just about purification, it was psychological disarmament, a way to ensure pilgrims arrived before the Pythia not as kings or soldiers but as supplicants. Imagine trekking for weeks under the Mediterranean sun, your sandals worn thin by mountain paths, all for a few fleeting moments in a smoke-filled chamber. That was the reality for every pilgrim who sought Delphi's wisdom. The journey itself was a test. While modern tourists strolled the ruins in hours, ancient visitors faced days of grueling preparation just to earn the right to ask a question. First came purification at the Castalian spring, where icy waters cascaded from the Phaedriades cliffs. You'd scrub your skin raw, not just to wash away dust, but to symbolically cleanse your soul. Even the wealthiest kings underwent this ritual. No amount of gold could buy a shortcut past the stern temple guardians. Next, you'd present your offering, a goat, preferably spotless, its throat slit over the altar while priests chanted. The animal's convulsions were read as signs. If it shuddered correctly, Apollo accepted your plea. Fail this test and you'd be sent away unheard, your journey wasted. Money changed hands next. A Pelanos, a flat fee, went to the temple coffers, but savvy pilgrims knew to bring extra. Bribes to priests could adjust your place in the consultation queue, though officially, order was decided by lot. Men drew clay tokens from a vessel. Women and slaves were barred entirely unless represented by male relatives. The inequality didn't stop there. While elites like Croesus could secure private audiences, commoners often received grouped prophecies, vague pronouncements meant to cover dozens of personal crises at once. Then the final ascent, climbing the sacred way's zigzagging path. You'd pass monuments to Delphi's power, a bronze bull from Corcyra, a golden tripod from Sparta, reminders that even mighty cities bowed here. By the time you reached the temple's threshold, trembling with exhaustion and anticipation, you were no longer a merchant or soldier. You were a supplicant stripped of status, ready to hear truths you might regret. But what happened when the prophecies backfired? Consider the Athenian general Themistocles, who banked his city's survival on interpreting Delphi's wooden walls metaphor, or King Cleomenes of Sparta, who went mad after defying the oracle's warning. These weren't just ancient cautionary tales, they were proof that Delphi's real power lay in how its words forced people to confront their own ambitions. The pilgrims didn't just come for answers, they came to be transformed. Now, let's unravel the riddles that shaped history, starting with the prophecy that lured a king to his doom. Some of history's most pivotal moments hinged on the riddles uttered in Delphi's shadowy chamber, words that could uplift empires or unravel lives with terrifying precision. No tale captures this duality better than the prophecy given to King Laos of Thebes, that his newborn son would one day murder him and marry his own mother. Desperate to cheat fate, Laos ordered the infant Oedipus abandoned on a mountainside. But destiny has a way of slipping through human fingers. Raised by foreign rulers, Oedipus grew up unaware of his true lineage until a chance encounter at a crossroads led him to unknowingly fulfill the oracle's grim prediction. The tragic irony, his parents' attempts to avoid the prophecy only ensured its fulfillment, proving Delphi's words weren't just warnings, they were traps laid by the gods themselves. Not all prophecies ended in ruin. When Athens faced the might of Persia's naval fleet in 480 BC, the Pythia's cryptic advice about wooden walls became their salvation. While some interpreted this as fortifying the city with barricades, the statesman Themistocles saw deeper. It was a call to trust their ships. That single insight turned the tide at Salamis, where Athens' outnumbered triremes outmaneuvered their enemies in the narrow straits. The victory didn't just save a city, it preserved the ideals of democracy and philosophy that would define Western civilization. Yet for every triumph, there were cautionary tales. The wealthy king Croesus of Lydia learned this too late when the oracle told him crossing the Halys River would destroy a great empire, neglecting to mention it would be his own. Even Sparta, Delphi's most devoted client, faced the oracle's ruthless impartiality. before the Battle of Thermopylae, the Pythia declared either their city would fall or a king must die. Leonidas's choice to sacrifice himself and his 300 warriors etched his name into legend while proving the prophecy's cruel elegance. They revealed destiny's shape but never the cost. What made these pronouncements so enduring wasn't their accuracy, but their psychological grip. The Pythia's words forced leaders to confront their own ambitions and blind spots. A vague prediction became a mirror, reflecting back the choices they were already inclined to make, whether in hubris like Croesus or ingenuity like Themistocles. And woven through it all was something unexpected: music. Before the prophecies were spoken, the temple's rituals pulsed with melody. Hymns to Apollo, played on lyres and sung in haunting harmonies, set the stage for divine revelation. These weren't mere performances, they were sonic keys, unlocking the minds of both priestess and pilgrims. As we'll see, the link between music and prophecy runs deeper than anyone imagined. While the oracle's prophecies dominated Delphi's reputation, the sacred site pulsed with another kind of magic: the power of music and poetry. Every 4 years, the slopes of Mount Parnassus erupted not with divine pronouncements, but with the cheers of spectators and the strains of lyres as Delphi hosted the Pythian Games. These weren't just athletic contests, they were a dazzling fusion of sport and art, where champions were immortalized in verse and Apollo's hymns echoed through the valley. Imagine the scene: oiled wrestlers straining in the stadium while just meters away, poets recited odes so exquisite their words would be remembered for centuries. At the heart of this artistic fervor stood the Kitharodes musicians who performed hymns to Apollo on elaborate stringed instruments, their melodies believed to channel the god's presence as powerfully as the Pythia's trances. The most skilled composers earned prizes rivaling those of Olympic athletes, their works etched into temple walls. One name towered above the rest: Pindar, the ancient world's equivalent of a Grammy-winning songwriter, whose victory odes turned mortal athletes into myths. His poem for the charioteer Arcesilaus of Cyrene didn't just celebrate a race, it wove the winner's story into the cosmic tapestry of fate and divine favor, blurring the line between competition and sacrament. But the music at Delphi ran deeper than entertainment. Archaeologists discovered that the temple's very architecture functioned as a giant sound chamber. The sacred way's zigzag path wasn't just symbolic. Its switchbacks amplified processional chants, creating a cascading echo effect. Even the theater's limestone seats were precisely angled to project whispers from the stage to the highest rows, a feat of engineering that made every hymn feel heaven-sent. This wasn't accidental. The Greeks understood music as mathematics made audible, a direct link between earthly harmony and the celestial order. Hidden within this artistic splendor lay a subtle language of symbols. The lyre carved into the temple's metopes wasn't merely decorative, it signaled Apollo's dominion over both prophecy and the arts. Laurel wreaths awarded to victors mirrored the leaves chewed by the Pythia, binding athletic triumph to divine inspiration. Even the Pythian Games' unusual 8-year cycle held meaning. It coincided with the celestial return of Apollo's sacred swans, said to circle Delphi's skies in perfect musical formation. As the last notes of the Kithara faded, visitors departing Delphi carried more than prophecies, they carried melodies that would echo through Greek homes for generations, turning the sanctuary's mysteries into something intimate and human. And just as music shaped the pilgrim's experience, so too did Delphi's silent storytellers, the stones themselves. The moment pilgrims stepped onto Delphi's sacred ground, they entered a world where every stone whispered meaning. The temple complex wasn't just a backdrop for prophecies, it was a three-dimensional puzzle of symbols, each element carefully crafted to guide visitors toward wisdom. Towering above them all stood the omphalos, the so-called navel of the world, a carved stone marking the spot where Zeus's eagles had met. but this wasn't merely a mythical landmark. Its intricate net-like patterns mirrored the cosmic web of fate, a tactile reminder that Delphi sat at the crossroads of human and divine realms. Walls throughout the sanctuary bore inscriptions that cut deeper than any prophecy. Know thyself wasn't the self-help mantra we imagine today. It was a stark warning against hubris when approaching the gods. Beside it, nothing in excess, counseled balance in a world where rulers like Croesus had fallen to their own greed. These weren't decorative phrases, they were psychological landmines, destabilizing visitors before they even reached the Pythia. Even the temple's orientation held significance, angled precisely so the rising sun on Apollo's feast days would illuminate the Aditan's entrance, as if the god himself were stepping into the chamber. The treasures lining the sacred way told their own stories. Cities vied to outdo each other with lavish offerings, but the most revealing was Athens' modest Ionic column. Its simplicity after defeating Persia signaled that true strength needed no embellishment, a subtle dig at rivals like Sparta, whose monuments dripped with martial pride. Meanwhile, the theater's curved seating wasn't just for acoustics. Its shape mirrored the cosmic order, with performances symbolizing humanity's fleeting role in the divine drama. Perhaps most ingenious was how Delphi's architecture manipulated perception. The winding path to the temple forced pilgrims to slow their pace, passing reminders of past visitors' follies and triumphs. By the time they reached the Pythia, the very stones had primed them to hear not just with their ears but with their souls. This wasn't accidental, it was spiritual engineering at its finest. Behind this symbolic tapestry moved the architects of Delphi's influence, figures who shaped not just its stones but the course of history itself. Their stories reveal how an isolated mountain shrine became the ancient world's moral compass. Behind every great institution stand the remarkable individuals who shaped its destiny, and Delphi was no exception. While the Pythia may have been the face of prophecy, her voice was amplified by a cast of brilliant minds who transformed the Oracle from a local shrine into history's most influential spiritual powerhouse. Take the Priestess Themis, a figure so revered that her name became synonymous with divine justice. Centuries before the classical era, she was said to have guarded Delphi's sacred traditions, ensuring prophecies retained their moral weight even as empires rose and fell. Then there was Cleisthenes, the Athenian reformer who didn't just consult the oracle, he weaponized its authority. Facing political chaos in 6th century Athens, he used Delphi's blessing to legitimize his radical democracy, proving that a well-timed prophecy could be as powerful as any army. But perhaps the most fascinating figure was the philosopher Plutarch, who served as a priest at Delphi during its Roman era. Unlike the mystics before him, he approached the oracle's workings with surprising rationality, documenting everything from the Pythia's health to the temple's peculiar geology. His writings reveal a man straddling two worlds, one foot in ancient faith, the other in budding skepticism, making him antiquity's closest thing to a scientific observer of the divine. These weren't mere bystanders to history. The high priests of Delphi, often overlooked, operated like spiritual diplomats, translating cryptic utterances into political gold. When Spartan kings demanded prophecies to justify wars, or Athenian envoys sought divine cover for colonial expeditions, these shadowy figures ensured the oracle's words carried just enough ambiguity to suit their agendas. Yet for all their influence, they understood one unshakable rule. The moment Delphi lost its aura of impartiality, its power would crumble. The true genius of these key players lay in their ability to balance tradition with reinvention. As centuries passed and empires shifted, they subtly adapted rituals, reinterpreted symbols, and even tweaked the Pythia's selection process to keep the oracle relevant. Their legacy wasn't carved in stone, it was woven into the very fabric of how societies grapple with the unknown. Now consider this, without these architects of ambiguity, would Delphi's prophecies have survived as anything more than local folklore? Their fingerprints are all over history's most fateful moments, not because they predicted the future, but because they understood the present better than anyone. And as we're about to see, their most enduring innovation wasn't the prophecies themselves, but the ingenious system used to preserve them for posterity. The words of the Pythia didn't just vanish into the mountain air, they were etched into history quite literally. After each prophetic session, temple scribes would carefully transcribe the oracle's cryptic messages onto wax tablets or parchment. The most significant pronouncements, like those given to kings and generals, were often carved directly into stone and displayed prominently along the sacred way. Walking through Delphi wasn't just a spiritual journey, it was like flipping through the pages of a living history book, with every stele and wall bearing fragments of divine wisdom. But these inscriptions were more than just records, they were strategic tools. The priests of Delphi understood the power of permanence. When a prophecy was chiseled into marble, it became immutable, transforming from a fleeting utterance into an unassailable truth. Take the infamous wooden walls prophecy given to Athens during the Persian Wars. By displaying it publicly, Delphi ensured its interpretation became collective destiny, rallying the entire city behind Themistocle's naval strategy. The stone didn't just preserve the words, it amplified their authority. Not all documentation was so ceremonial. Temple archives housed meticulous ledgers, lists of consulted prophecies, names of petitioners, even the fees they paid. Historians like Herodotus and Plutarch pored over these records, weaving them into their accounts. Yet for all this diligence, much was lost. Earthquakes toppled archives, fires consumed scrolls, and Christian zealots later defaced inscriptions. What survives today is merely a fraction, like pages torn from a cosmic playbook. Among the most tantalizing gaps are the so-called secret oracles, prophecies deemed too explosive for public display. Rumors persist of a hidden archive beneath the temple where priests stored politically sensitive revelations. Did these lost texts contain warnings about Alexander's empire or Rome's rise? Their absence leaves us with a haunting question. How much of history's pivotal moments were shaped by words we'll never recover? Beyond the sanctuary walls, a network of messengers carried Delphi's pronouncements across the ancient world. These heralds weren't mere couriers, they were trained in the art of sacred recitation, ensuring each syllable retained its power even when spoken far from the god's presence. In an era before mass communication, this system turned local prophecies into geopolitical forces, their influence rippling outward like stones cast into a pond. Yet for all the care taken to preserve the oracle's voice, the records reveal an unsettling pattern. The surviving inscriptions overwhelmingly feature success stories, prophecies that seemingly came true. The countless misinterpretations, the failed predictions, those were quietly omitted, scrubbed from the official narrative. This selective memory speaks volumes about Delphi's genius. It wasn't just a place of prophecy, but of myth-making, where the messy edges of history were polished into divine inevitability. As we piece together these fragmented texts, one truth emerges: the priests didn't just record the future, they curated it. Every chiseled stroke, every copied scroll was a choice about which versions of truth would endure. But beneath this carefully constructed legacy, Delphi had another, darker story to tell, one written not in stone, but in blood and betrayal. The hallowed halls of Delphi weren't immune to human frailty. For every prophecy that guided nations to glory, there were whispers of manipulation and fatal missteps. Take the tragic case of King Cleomenes of Sparta, who sought the oracle's blessing to depose a rival. When the Pythia's response seemed unfavorable, rumors spread that he'd bribed the priests to revise it. The scandal unraveled his reign, driving him to madness and a grisly suicide. His story became a cautionary tale, tampering with the gods will carry consequences no crown could shield. Even without outright corruption, the weight of misinterpretation could be catastrophic. When the city of Thebes asked how to end a plague, the oracle cryptically advised expelling the pollution. Desperate, leaders scapegoated a local shepherd, executing him as the supposed source only for the plague to rage on. The real pollution, historians later speculated, was likely a neglected spring contaminated by battlefield corpses. A single ambiguous phrase had cost an innocent man his life. Critics like the philosopher Euripides went further, accusing Delphi of operating like a divine marketplace. In his play Ion, he painted the priests as shrewd negotiators, tailoring prophecies to the highest bidder. While hard evidence is scarce, temple records reveal curious patterns. Wealthy patrons like Croesus received more detailed pronouncements, while commoners often got vague platitudes. Yet the most damning blow came from within. Plutarch, himself a Delphic priest, admitted that by his era, the Pythia's trances had grown erratic, a decline he blamed not on divine abandonment, but on greedy officials rushing consultations to maximize profits. Modern spiritual seekers view Delphi through a different lens. Psychologists recognize the Pythia's trances as altered states of consciousness, not unlike those sought by today's meditators or psychedelic explorers. The temple's rituals, from breathwork with sacred fumes to sensory deprivation in the Aditon, mirror techniques used in contemporary mindfulness practices. Even the oracle's riddles find parallels in modern tarot or astrology, where open-ended guidance allows personal interpretation. What fascinates scholars now isn't whether the prophecies were real, but why they resonated so deeply. The answer may lie in neuroscience. The gas-induced trances, the rhythmic chanting, the awe of the temple, all triggered dopamine and cortisol spikes that made every word feel revelatory. In that sense, Delphi's true power wasn't foreseeing the future, but holding up a mirror to humanity's eternal search for meaning in chaos. The scandals, the tragedies, even the moments of transcendence, they all reveal less about the gods than about ourselves. As the echoes of the oracle fade, one question lingers. If we could stand in that sacred chamber today, breathing the same intoxicating air, would we hear the voice of Apollo? Or simply the whispers of our own longing? Even as Delphi's stones crumbled into ruins, its legacy refused to fade instead. It quietly seeped into the spiritual imagination of our modern world. Today, New Age seekers trek the same mountain paths as ancient pilgrims, not to consult the Pythia, but to meditate where she once sat, convinced the site still pulses with what they call sacred energy. Books and workshops tout Delphi as the ultimate symbol of intuition, urging followers to channel their inner oracle through breathwork, crystal grids, or sound baths. On any given morning, you might find visitors placing their palms against the weathered stones of the Temple of Apollo, eyes closed as if waiting for whispers from the past. This revival isn't just romantic nostalgia, it's rooted in a deeper hunger. In an age of algorithms and uncertainty, Delphi represents something we've lost, a tangible bridge between the material and the mystical. Modern psychics compare their trance states to the Pythia's gas-induced visions, while mindfulness coaches borrow from the temple's rituals, swapping laurel leaves for sage smudges and ethylene vapors for binaural beats. Even the Delphi method, a structured forecasting technique used by futurists, owes its name to the oracle's knack for distilling collective wisdom. Yet not all attempts to resurrect Delphi's magic hold up to scrutiny. Entrepreneurs hawk Pythia oils and oracle cards, while influencers pose in flowing white robes for Instagram shots at the omphalos. Critics argue this dilutes Delphi's complexity into commodified spirituality, a far cry from the brutal honesty of the original prophecies, which often delivered hard truths rather than comfort. Still, the fascination persists, proving that whether through geological gases or guided meditations, humans still crave what the ancients found here, a way to touch the intangible. What's striking is how science has inadvertently fueled this revival. Studies confirming the presence of mind-altering gases beneath the temple lend an air of legitimacy to claims about Delphi's energy vortexes. Geologists' maps of fault lines now double as pilgrimage guides for those seeking ley lines of earthly power. It's a peculiar marriage of hard data and mysticism, one the original priests might have appreciated. Behind the trendiness, though, lies a profound truth. Our obsession with Delphi isn't about reconstructing the past, it's about reinventing its magic for today's anxieties. The Pythia never promised easy answers, and neither does life now. Perhaps that's why her echo endures, not as a relic, but as a mirror reflecting our timeless need to believe there's more beneath the surface. And just as these modern seekers reinterpret Delphi's mysteries, so too did the greatest thinkers of antiquity who turned the oracle's riddles into the foundation of Western philosophy. The stone-carved wisdom of Delphi didn't just influence kings and generals, it became the bedrock of Western philosophy itself. High above the temple entrance, two simple words challenged every visitor: "Not thy suiton, know thyself." Far from a casual greeting, this was a philosophical grenade disguised as advice. When Socrates adopted it as his life's mantra, he transformed Delphi's spiritual warning into a radical call for self-examination. Picture the irony: history's greatest skeptic drawing inspiration from the ancient world's most mystical institution. Plato took the connection even deeper. In his dialogues, he has Socrates compare the oracle to a midwife not delivering truths, but helping thinkers give birth to their own insights. This wasn't mere metaphor. Like the Pythia's riddles, Socratic questioning forced students to confront contradictions in their beliefs, turning Delphi's ambiguity into a teaching tool. Even Aristotle, though more empirical, acknowledged the oracle's role in shaping ethical frameworks, arguing that its prophecies worked precisely because they mirrored life's inherent uncertainties. Yet the most fascinating philosophical twist lies in how these thinkers subverted Delphi's authority. By championing human reason over blind faith, they took the temple's ancient warnings, originally meant to humble mortals before the gods, and redirected them toward intellectual liberation. That inscribed phrase, "nothing in excess," became a cornerstone of Aristotelian moderation, while the very act of interpreting prophecies evolved into early exercises in critical thinking. This philosophical afterlife reveals Delphi's true genius. Its messages were like intellectual seeds planted in sacred soil, but blossoming unpredictably across centuries. The same vapors that sent the Pythia into divine frenzies also quietly intoxicated the minds of antiquity's greatest thinkers. And as we're about to see, this exchange of ideas wasn't limited to abstract debate. It fueled an economic engine that bankrolled an entire civilization. What began as spiritual consultation had quietly become one of antiquity's most sophisticated industries. Beyond the philosophical pilgrims, Delphi thrived on a complex economy of sacred fees, state-sponsored donations, and even divine-inspired tourism. The temple's wealth wasn't just measured in gold, it lay in its ability to monetize humanity's hunger for meaning. The sacred slopes of Delphi didn't just echo with prophecies, they clinked with the sound of gold. Behind the spiritual facade, the sanctuary operated as one of antiquity's most sophisticated financial hubs, where offerings weren't just acts of devotion but strategic investments. When Croesus of Lydia famously tested the oracle by sending a king's ransom in gold, he wasn't merely seeking divine favor. He was flexing economic muscle, knowing Delphi's endorsement could sway allies and intimidate rivals. City-states competed to outdo each other with lavish tributes, constructing elaborate treasuries along the sacred way like a row of ancient bank vaults. Athens' treasury, built with marble from the quarries of Paros, displayed spoils from their victory over Persia, a calculated show of power disguised as piety. Inside these miniature temples, gifts piled up, silver ingots from Corinth, bronze statues from Sparta, even intricate ivory carvings from distant Egypt. The priests didn't just collect these offerings, they managed them with meticulous record-keeping, lending out treasures to allied states in times of crisis, an early form of sacred credit. But the real financial genius lay in Delphi's fee system. Consultation wasn't free, a mandatory Pelanos payment was required, scaled by the petitioner's wealth. Kings paid in gold, farmers in grain, and everyone in between contributed according to means. These funds didn't vanish into ritual expenses. They built Delphi's grandeur, the sprawling gymnasium where athletes trained, the sprawling stadium that hosted thousands, even the intricate hydraulic systems piping water from the Castalian spring. The sanctuary became a self-sustaining engine, converting spiritual capital into stone and mortar. Yet this wealth came with risks. When the Phocians looted Delphi's treasures in the 4th century BC to fund mercenaries, Greece erupted in outrage, not just at the sacrilege, but at the destabilization of a de facto financial network. The incident revealed an uncomfortable truth. Delphi's influence wasn't merely supernatural, it was economic. Pilgrims didn't just visit for prophecies. They came because the sanctuary was where politics, finance, and faith intersected, a Wall Street of the ancient world wrapped in sacred laurel. Behind this system stood figures rarely credited in history books, the temple's financial administrators. These unsung accountants tracked every obol, ensuring offerings were displayed prominently enough to attract more donations while discreetly funneling surplus into maintenance and influence. Their ledgers, some preserved in fragmentary inscriptions, reveal a startling modernity: columns debiting sacrificial animals, crediting construction costs, even noting interest on loans. The economics of Delphi proved that its power wasn't just about foreseeing the future, it was about funding it. And as coins changed hands and treasures piled high, another group quietly shaped the sanctuary's destiny, their contributions often overshadowed by the grandeur around them, the women of Delphi. While the Pythia stood as Delphi's most visible woman, her voice channeling the divine, the reality for other women at the sanctuary was far more complicated. Beyond the inner sanctum where the priestess communed with Apollo, women faced strict prohibitions. They couldn't approach the temple's altar during sacrifices, consult the oracle directly, or even set foot in certain sacred spaces unless accompanied by male guardians. For a site dedicated to prophecy, the future for most women seemed frustratingly predetermined. Yet hidden in the shadows of these restrictions were surprising pockets of influence. During the Theophania, Delphi's grandest festival celebrating Apollo's return each spring, women took center stage. They led processions carrying sacred laurel branches, performed hypnotic dances in honor of the god, and even organized rituals at secondary shrines dedicated to female deities like Athena and Artemis. Some festivals included women-only rites where they poured libations and sang hymns passed down through generations, a rare glimpse of spiritual autonomy in a male-dominated world. The contrast was striking. The same culture that barred women from consulting the oracle also entrusted them with safeguarding Delphi's most ancient traditions. Wealthy women like Clea, a priestess of the temple of Isis, left inscriptions detailing their generous donations, proving they wielded economic clout even when excluded from formal power. Meanwhile, female artisans wove the intricate textiles that adorned statues and altars, their craftsmanship literally wrapping the sacred in threads spun by unseen hands. This paradox reveals something deeper about ancient Greek society. Women might have been kept at arm's length from official prophecy, but their roles in maintaining Delphi's spiritual ecosystem were anything but marginal. They were the keepers of oral traditions, the teachers of ritual choreography, the unseen weavers of the temple's visual splendor. The Pythia's prominence was the exception that proved the rule, a reminder that even in a world designed to silence them, women's voices found ways to resonate. As we peel back these layers, one truth becomes clear. Delphi's genius wasn't just in its prophecies, but in its ability to balance contradictions. The sanctuary thrived on dualities, male and female, chaos and order, mortal and divine. And nowhere was this tension more palpable than in the question that has haunted historians for millennia: what truly lay behind the Pythia's trances? The answer, it turns out, was written not in the stars, but in the very earth beneath her feet. The mystery of the Pythia's trance lingers like incense in Delphi's ruined halls. Was she truly touched by the divine, or were her visions born from the earth itself? Modern science offers compelling clues, but the full picture remains as layered as one of her riddles. Beneath the temple, geologists identified fault lines seeping ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas known to induce euphoria and trance-like states. Chemical analysis confirms what ancient sources described. The Pythia didn't just sit above a crack in the earth, she inhaled its intoxicating breath. Yet this revelation doesn't strip her prophecies of power. If anything, it deepens the wonder. The priests of Delphi didn't merely stumble upon this phenomenon. They harnessed it, weaving geology into sacred ritual with breathtaking precision. But gases alone couldn't account for the oracle's enduring influence. The psychological stagecraft was equally masterful. Imagine the scene: a pilgrim, exhausted from days of travel, purified in icy springs, surrounded by towering monuments and the murmur of chants. By the time they reached the Pythia's dimly lit chamber, their mind was primed for revelation. The trembling priestess, her voice distorted, her words fragmented, every detail amplified the sense of otherworldly contact. This wasn't deception, it was a profound understanding of human psychology. The prophecies thrived on ambiguity because life itself is uncertain. When the Pythia spoke, she offered not answers but mirrors, reflecting back the hopes and fears of those who sought her. What's striking is how these elements, chemical, psychological, and spiritual, converge to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Skeptics might dismiss the trances as intoxication, yet ancient accounts describe some Pythias delivering eerily coherent insights even in altered states. Believers might attribute her words to Apollo, but the temple's priests clearly shaped her raw utterances into politically savvy guidance. The truth likely lies in the interplay. A woman of humble origins, trained in ritual, breathing sacred fumes, channeling both divine inspiration and mortal intuition. Perhaps the real magic was the system itself, a perfect storm of nature and human ingenuity, and that's why Delphi still captivates us. In an age of algorithms and absolutes, the oracle's legacy reminds us that truth rarely wears one face. Her power wasn't in certainty, but in the space she held for mystery. Today, pilgrims no longer climb the sacred way with sacrificial goats, but we still seek our own versions of prophecy, in tarot cards, therapy sessions, or even data-driven predictions. The mediums change, but the hunger remains, to feel, if only for a moment, that the universe might whisper back. Delphi's greatest lesson wasn't about foreseeing the future. It was about learning to sit with the questions, to find meaning not in answers, but in the search itself. As the sun sets over Mount Parnassus, casting long shadows across the temple's ruins, the stones seem to murmur, not with Apollo's voice, but with an invitation. To wonder, to doubt, to recognize that every generation has its oracles, its sacred fumes, its desperate climbers yearning for light in the dark. The Pythia is gone, but the human need she answered, that endures. The story of the Oracle of Delphi isn't just a relic of the ancient world. It's a mirror reflecting our own timeless yearning to make sense of life's uncertainties. Whether through divine whispers or geological whispers, the Pythia's enigmatic legacy reminds us that truth has always been a tapestry woven from myth, intuition, and human ingenuity. Her prophecies weren't meant to hand down absolutes, but to challenge seekers to confront their own assumptions, to weigh every word, every sign, and find meaning in the spaces between. What makes Delphi's echo endure isn't just the drama of trances and riddles, but the raw humanity behind them. Think of the farmers' daughters turned priestesses, the anxious generals clutching ambiguous scrolls, the philosophers who transformed "know thyself" from a warning into a revolution. These weren't characters in a fable, they were people just like us, grappling with the same fears and hopes that drive us to seek guidance today, whether from stars, algorithms, or sacred stones. As we step back from Delphi's ruins, the real revelation isn't about uncovering how the oracle worked, it's recognizing why her voice still captivates. In a world that craves certainty, she stands as a testament to the power of questions over answers, of the journey over the destination. The past never really fades, it simply waits for us to listen differently. And if you've ever found yourself pausing at life's crossroads, wondering what might lie ahead, you've already walked the sacred way in your own way. History's greatest mysteries aren't locked away in temples or buried in dust, they're alive in the stories we keep retelling, the truths we keep reinterpreting. So where should we wander next? The past is full of voices just as compelling as the Pythias, each waiting to whisper their secrets. Subscribe now and let's keep unraveling them together, one enigmatic thread at a time.